Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I am doing my September wrap-up. So in the month of September, I actually managed to read 7 books. So some of them I had started prior to September, but all of these I finished in September. So I'm going to try to go in chronological order. So starting with the first book that I finished in that month. It was actually a nonfiction, which is pretty rare for me to read, but it was How to Win Friends and Influence People by Carnegie, which I feel like is one of the most quintessential self-help books out there. I mean, this one I've heard so much about, so I finally wanted to give it a read myself. It's pretty darn short, and I really loved this. I think it had a lot of great lessons that I will use for the rest of my life, and as someone who is very introverted and always kind of dreads the small talk and that sort of thing, I wanted to see if there were any tips and tricks to kind of get better at those sorts of social situations, and there definitely was. There was a lot of great stuff in this book. It talks about not only how to interact better with people in those types of social situations, like at a party or at an office gathering or whatever it may be, but it also talks about how to kind of win people over to the side of your argument, and it was really interesting. I think that this is something that anyone can get something out of. You know, some of it you may already know, but some of the other stuff, it was just good reminders, good things to keep in mind. I will say this particular edition, this has nothing to do with the actual book and the content, but this particular edition that I got has a ton of typos. I don't know if the actual edition, like the hardcover or the normal paperback, I think that this is like a special edition, but I don't know if that normal edition has as many typos, but this was littered with typos. I was shocked. So if you do see this particular edition floating around, maybe don't get this one, maybe get like the normal edition. I don't know, it has nothing again to do with like the content or the quality of the book, but it's just something I thought I'd point out just in case you ever see this particular edition versus another one. Get the other one. Would recommend it to really anybody, and it's super short, so again, I think you'll at least get something out of it. You may not find every single lesson that he has to say the most helpful, but at least some of them you can kind of pick and choose which ones are most relevant to you or which ones you're most interested in learning about. So that was the only nonfiction that I read. So a quick YA horror/thriller that I read was The Wood by Chelsea Bobulski. So sorry if I mispronounced that. So this one had such an awesome cover. I really wanted to read this one in the fall time, kind of around spooky season, because look, I mean, it's got a fall leaf with blood dripping down. I mean, that just screams spooky season to me. So I had kind of certain expectations going into this book because of like the cover and just the vibes it gives, and it was not what I expected at all. This was very different than what I thought it would be. I thought that this was going to be definitely more of like a young adult horror novel. It was more actual like fantasy than anything else. This was very like magical realism, fantasy heavy. So this takes place in our world where this young girl is we learn that her and her father are kind of in charge of this area called the Wood, where this particular wood area is the destination of like time travelers. So people are able to like time travel from all different times in different places around the world, and when they travel from their time, they land in this particular wood. So the daughter and her father are trained to kind of get people back to their time so that they don't mess up kind of history or any of the timeline. So it was very much a time travel story, very fantastical because of that. And the father very early on in this book goes missing, so the daughter is kind of left to defend the wood on her own. And she meets a traveler who may have some information about where her father went. So she teams up with this traveler from a different time to kind of find out maybe what happened to her father. So overall, like, this concept was really cool. Like, I liked the aspect of the wood, and there's definitely some creepy elements to the wood. There are some things that if you veer off the path of the wood, like there's these creatures that can get you. So there were some creepy elements that made it a little bit more horror, but because I was expecting a more horror-based novel, not so much fantasy, I didn't love this as much as I thought I would. I thought that the main character was someone that was easy to get behind and root for. She was very intelligent, she was very independent, which I really, really liked, and the traveler she teams up with, I really enjoyed him as well. So I really liked their dynamic together. But this one, there was a little too much emphasis placed on kind of her life outside of the wood, like her school life, and there was very much like the typical high school issues and that sort of thing. And just as an older reader, that was something that I just wasn't as interested in reading about. So this one was just, it was pretty good. Like, I definitely would recommend it for young adult readers who really like a good young adult mystery with some fantasy thrown in there, some time travel stories. I thought that this was very unique and cool, but it just concentrated on things that I was hoping it wouldn't, like the high school life and that sort of thing. So overall though, this was a fun read, but just not one I would probably go back to. And then the last book that I read that was not fantasy was actually a sci-fi that is a new release. It just released September 28th, and it was an arc that was so kindly sent to me by the publisher, and it was Activation Degradation by Marina J. Lostetter. So I know that this author recently released a fantasy book called Helm of Midnight, which is one that has been on my radar and one that I really want to check out. I had no idea that she was releasing a new sci-fi book. So when I got the email from the publisher, I had never heard of it before, but it was kind of pitched as the Murderbot Diaries Makes First Contact. So that was intriguing to me because I really like artificial intelligence stories. I really like kind of alien or robot stories where it kind of questions like, what does it mean to be human, and that sort of thing. I like those thematic elements that are present when the main character is like a robot or an alien or an artificial intelligence of some kind. So I thought that this would be something that I would really enjoy, even though I wasn't a huge fan of Murderbot, just because of kind of Murderbot's personality, and some of the humor in that story didn't really work for me. But I wanted to give this one a try, and I'm so glad I did. This was really, really good. I really enjoyed this. I will say the very beginning of this book, you are definitely thrown in. You are not handheld through this world at all. There are a lot of like spacey sci-fi terms that are thrown at you, lots of like dense language that it took a while to get used to. I will say, like, the first 100 pages of this book, I just was not sure about it. I wasn't sure if I was gonna like it. It was very, very dense, sci-fi heavy, like just a lot of terms that I was like, I don't know what this means. So finally, after about page 100, I kind of got oriented to the world, to the story, and knew what was going on and was fully in after that point. After the first 100 pages, I was so hooked. This particular story follows this kind of robot who wakes up, they are activated, and they're immediately thrown into this war where these alien species are trying to attack a mining colony on Jupiter, and this mining colony is supposed to help support life back on Earth. So these robots are made to protect this colony on Jupiter from this alien species that is trying to invade. So our main character is thrown in. They have to kind of go to war right away, but they don't really have any memory of the alien that they're fighting, of why they're fighting. So they're kind of thrown in, but there's a lot of mystery to kind of what's happening and why these aliens are attacking and who these aliens really are. And there's this kind of plot twist after like the first 100 pages where it gets really interesting. The mystery element to this story is very, very intriguing, captivating, keeps you turning the page. I really, really liked that. I thought that there were a lot of great themes explored, which is exactly what I was looking for kind of out of this type of story, was a lot of themes about, you know, what does it mean to be human? It asks a lot of like questions morally what's right versus what's wrong. You're not really sure if like the main characters of this story are doing the right thing. I really, really liked the themes and the questions that this book presented. I thought it was fantastic for that reason. And I just really loved the mystery element to it. I loved the pacing and the plot. So this one for me was very good. It wasn't a new favorite just because of that slower start. The first 100 pages were pretty darn confusing. So that kind of took away a little bit from the story, especially since it's not too long. I think it's like around 350 pages. So for the first 100 to be confusing, you know, there wasn't a whole lot of story left, but the story that we did get after that was really, really good. So I would highly recommend this one if that sounds interesting to you, because this was a really cool story that I just haven't seen a lot of people talking about. And all the rest of the books I have to talk about are all fantasy. So I'm just gonna go in, again, chronological order. And the first one I finished in September was The Blood Mirror by Brent Weeks. This is the 4th book in the Lightbringer series, and it was chunky, so it took me a while to read, but I did it, I finished it, and I have a lot of thoughts. The 3rd book so far is my least favorite, but The Blood Mirror definitely for me was a step up, and I think it was solely because of a certain character's storyline in this book was absolutely bonkers. If you have read the series and read this book, you probably know which character I'm talking about. But there were so many twists and turns for this one character, and I couldn't put it down because of that. The only problem was because this one character's storyline was so intense and fast-paced and like just so full of twists. Every time we were in a different character's perspective, I just wanted to go back to this other character. So that was the only problem, was some of the other characters didn't have quite as much going on. So I would still say that this was like a very good book. I did enjoy it kind of throughout the entirety of the book, and I enjoyed, you know, a lot of the character moments and some of the certain scenes and such, and the revelations. But really what made me enjoy this book the most was one character in particular, and the twists and the turns that they experience. I'm trying to be so vague to avoid any spoilers, but my God. If you read the book, you know what I'm talking about. I would say like the biggest thing for me right now that's a disconnect is we got so much of kind of the antagonist point of view in the first couple books. We like really knew who we were fighting and why. And I feel like it got a little bit lost in the 3rd and 4th book. We like didn't have as much of that character, and we didn't get as much of, not their point of view, because we were never really in their particular point of view, but it was a side character who was associating with the antagonist. I want to know more of what the Color Prince is up to, basically. And that's for me like the biggest disconnect, is we really never get to see what the Color Prince is up to. Like we hear about it, but we never really get to see it. And he was such an interesting villain. I love those villains where you can see where they're coming from. Like there are things in this society that obviously don't work, and you can see why this villain feels the way they do. It's just the tactics they employ to get what they want are not something that you support. So I really found the villain fascinating, and we really don't get much of him at all in the later books, and I'm kind of surprised. I was really hoping to get a little bit more of his story. So far it's really been kind of one-sided, and at times it feels like we lose the picture of the greater war because of that. So that's kind of my biggest problem right now with the book. I will say Kip's storyline in this particular book, it was very romance heavy, and I actually quite enjoyed it, but I feel like because it was kind of this side plot that was going on and took so much time away from other things, it again felt like the bigger picture was kind of lost. Like what we're fighting for, what this war is all about, it was kind of lost because we were placing so much more emphasis on Kip's romance and that sort of subplot. I have mixed feelings about this series so far. I think it does some things so incredibly well, particularly the twists and turns in this book are just amazing. I just love them. But then other times I like forget what we're here for, if that makes sense. So that's just kind of been my experience. I'm curious how the 5th book is going to end. I've heard a lot of mixed reviews. I've heard a lot of people say that they don't like how it ends. I've heard some others say that they're perfectly satisfied with it. So I'm very curious how I'm going to feel. But the first book is still my favorite. I loved the introduction of the magic system. The magic system is one of the strongest parts of this entire series. And I loved it felt much smaller in scope during the first book, the plot and the world, and it was much easier to follow. And I knew where we were, I knew why we were there, and it kind of gets lost a little bit as we move on with the series. So that's my feeling on the Blood Mirror and Lightbringer right now. So we'll see how I feel after the 5th book. Then I read Wildcat by JP Harker, which was a self-published book that was so kindly sent to me by the author. So thank you so much for sending me this gorgeous book. This is very much a Viking-inspired story where we follow our main character, Rhea, who lives in this town. She's kind of given up this warrior life to settle down with this man of her dreams and have children, and just wants that kind of life moving forward. But something happens where this life is quickly torn away from her, and she's kind of forced to live with an enemy. And it kind of follows her story as she kind of grows with this enemy that she's living with, and kind of has to become involved in this war that she originally wanted no part of. So this for me was very character driven. We really only are ever in Rhea's point of view. So if you don't love Rhea, then I feel like it's hard to love this book. So for me, this was pretty good because first of all, the writing was really well done. It was very well paced. There were some scenes that were really sad and pulled on the heartstrings. Like Rhea, our main character, goes through it. She goes through so much in this book, and you really feel for her. Like at times it's almost too much that she has to go through. Like there was something that happened at the end that was almost like, did we really need that as well on top of everything else? It was just so sad what she has to go through. So you really feel for her, and I can totally see why she was the way she was. But for me, I didn't fully connect with her. I felt like sometimes she was this amazing warrior who was so strong, and then it was like a flip of a switch where something would happen. It would just be a completely different character. Like I can see why those choices were made, but for me, it was like almost too quick of a flip of a switch. Like I didn't know really who Rhea was because of the drastic change so quickly that she would go through. So I never really felt super connected with her, which is why I think I just didn't feel as connected to the story in general, because it's so focused on her and her growth and her arc. We get a couple of other points of view sporadically in the book, and actually I wish we had gotten even more of them, because I found the world fascinating and kind of this brewing war fascinating, and I wanted more perspectives to kind of shed more light on different sides of that war, if that makes sense. I personally really appreciate that in books. I love seeing kind of the opposite sides of war and the politicking and kind of the build up to those battles and that sort of thing. And we really didn't get a whole lot of that just because we're solely in Rhea's point of view most of the time. This is definitely just a case of this particular type of fantasy wasn't my favorite thing to read, because there wasn't anything super fantastical. There was no magic. It was very much like rooted in reality. So there really weren't those aspects to kind of pull you into the world and make the world super fascinating. It was very much like just our reality. And the character of Rhea herself, like I could sympathize and I could see why she was the way she was, but I just personally like didn't connect with her a whole lot. I would definitely recommend this though, because again, the writing was spectacular. I thought it was really well done. The action scenes were really well choreographed, and it was very easy to follow. And for such a big book, it actually read really quick. The pacing's very quick. So I would definitely recommend this for character-driven fantasy readers who, you know, don't necessarily care about magic and expansive world building. You kind of like those fantasy stories that are more rooted in reality and kind of following a character's growth, just following kind of their emotional journey through this war. So that's who I would recommend this to. So definitely glad I read it. It was really well done. So definitely check it out if that sounds like it would be something that would interest you. And I finished The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman, which is the third and final book in the His Dark Materials trilogy. And, you know, I just don't think that the series is for me. I liked the first book. That was my favorite one. And then it kind of went a little bit downhill from there. And this is a case of, it's hard for me to pinpoint why. I don't know why, I just didn't care. It's so interesting because sometimes with a story I can pinpoint exactly what it is that I don't like. For this one, it was like I didn't like the plot. Like I didn't like the plot really of the story. Like it went, like don't get me wrong, like I think that this is really well done. And I can see why this series is so popular, for sure. But for me, I didn't care for it. Like I just didn't care. And like the characters, I just didn't really care about. Yikes. So, I mean, this was fine. It was fine. It was fine. Like it didn't do anything like wrong. Like I'm not mad at it. It's just, it was fine. For a middle grade, I'm shocked that this is middle grade because it goes really dark. Like this goes to some really dark places and it's quite complex. Like there were times where I was like, how is this a middle grade? Like if I had read this as a kid, I don't think I would have known what was going on. And I think that that's maybe the difference is if you read it kind of when you're the intended audience, you latch on to the things that are really fun about the series, like Lyra as a character is someone I can definitely, as a kid, I would have really, really liked her. And kind of the story between her and Will and some of the more fantastical elements of the story, like the kind of world hopping that they do and that sort of thing. I think all of that I would have liked a lot, but I don't think I would have noticed a lot of the other really dark themes, very dark religious themes in these books, and just really complex like church politics, and it was quite dense at some times. So I'm actually kind of surprised that this is a middle grade series. I think just middle grade readers probably don't catch a lot of that when you're the intended audience, because even I was like, it got hard to follow at sometimes, like who's who and all of that. Yeah, this one for me, I'd reread it in the future and enjoy it a lot more, but right now is like first time reading it through, it was fine. And I think it was just at the end of the day I just didn't really care about the plot of the story or the characters. So sorry I can't be more specific as to like exactly what went wrong for me here, but it was more of just a general feeling of like not caring. So kind of bummed, kind of disappointed. But what was not a disappointment was my final read of the month, which was Winds of Strife by UG Gutman, which, don't look at the corner of this book, it was bit by my dog. I'm very sad about it, but but the cover is beautiful, other than this bitten corner. This story, on the other hand, I loved. I thought that this was fantastic. This was a self-published book that was sent to me so kindly by the author, and I am so incredibly impressed. This book follows a character named Nye who works for this king, and he is tasked with befriending the king's daughter, who has these brewing powers that she doesn't really understand, and to kind of control those powers and hold them back. I kind of makes her fall in love with him and is able to kind of manipulate her to hide her powers. And this is, I mean, this story has so much more than just that. That's kind of like your central plot that initiates everything else. But what's so cool about this book is the world and the magic system. The magic system in this book is, I think, Sanderson level unique, creative, awesome, like so well explained, so well thought out. It has to do with emotions and people being able to harness different emotions to gain power from them. So for example, you could summon confidence, and having confidence gives you more speed. Or you could harness anger, and when you harness anger, you have the ability to manipulate fire. It's so cool, and the way the fight scenes go with this magic system at play is so cool. The different ways it can be utilized is so fascinating. There are throughout the book different kind of illustrations that help you understand the magic system. So it's really, really easy to follow, and it's just really cool discovering it through the characters using it in so many different ways. The world has this really fascinating history behind it that you just want to know more about. It's just all so well thought out. The greatest strength is definitely the magic system, the plot, the pacing. It's just fantastic throughout. The characters themselves, this is where I can see people either loving the book or not liking it as much, because the characters themselves, I loved them. I thought that they were all very morally gray. None of them are really great people. All of them are very, very flawed. They do things that are not great. Nye in particular, he's probably my least favorite character, only because he actually is not a good person and has a lot of very deep-seated issues, and he kind of has this voice that incites violence in him. And so he's a really, really morally gray character, and I will give you warnings for a lot of like physical abuse in this book. It's not anything graphic or extraneous that's on the page, but it's definitely referenced a lot. There's a little bit of it in the book on the page, but I can see why someone would read this and would not like it if they didn't like that aspect of these characters and how extremely flawed they are. Now, for me, I just really like well-written characters, in my subjective opinion, what are well-written characters, and I thought that these were really well-written characters. Even though they were all extremely flawed, I found all of them had a very, very unique voice and personality. It was so easy, and this is a pretty big cast, it was so easy to tell who was who. Like, they were all very much individuals. Like, you can tell that the author really knew his characters because of how he was able to write them and make them sound so different from each other. And then even though they were extremely flawed, I liked seeing how they interacted with each other. I liked following them. I think characters like Glitter are a ton of fun, even though, again, she has some extreme flaws. She does things I was like, are you serious, Glitter? Like, really? But again, I liked her character as just a well-written character. And then I liked Diana a lot. Like, she was awesome. So there are such good characters in this book, but I can see how if you need characters that you can like root for and get behind and that are kind of like the noble and just characters, this may not be for you because your characters are not necessarily good people, but you can like still root for them anyway. It's a hard thing to explain. So I personally loved this book. I thought it was so much fun. So much fun. It got really dark at some points, but I really, really enjoyed it. I loved like the politicking. I loved like kind of this big plan at the end that we're building up to and watching it kind of play out where we as the reader don't know exactly how it's going to go. And it was just twists and turns. It was so much fun. So I loved it. I loved the ending. I'm so excited for book 2. I can't recommend this enough to especially fantasy readers that love a good, unique magic system. This has one of the best. Like, I would say that this is like on the level of like Lightbringer, Mistborn kind of magic system. It's just so cool. I loved it. So highly recommend. I'm so glad that I read this and that the author sent it to me. Thank you so much, Yuri, for sending me this. Can't recommend it enough. So if that sounds interesting to you, go pick up Winds of Strife. So those were all of the books that I read in the month of September. What was your favorite book that you read in September? And did you see any that I read that you've also read, and what were your thoughts on them? Thank you all so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.